my parents craved money, meaning they needed it because my dad was unemployed for long stretches of time. My mom was a sole breadwinner. She was a housekeeper, then she was a nurse's aide. And I would just see how she grinded. We didn't have a car for a long time. She takes the bus, we all take the bus. When I got my first job, it was at Burger King. I'd take the money and I'd have to give it to my parents, and we would buy bus passes. And I remember telling like some of my friends, I went to a very good high school, kind of like the rich high school, not the high school I should have gone to. I was able to go to this different high school. And I would remember I would tell them like, hey, this is like, yeah, I would be so ashamed that I worked at Burger King. They would sometimes come by and I would just be like, oh, fuck, and then at some point it was like this release moment where I was like, this is my life. Like I can't do anything about it. This is what it is right now. And I kind of had a sense that I could figure some stuff out later, but I didn't really know. And so I just accepted it. And then the minute I accepted it, I wasn't ashamed anymore. And then when I wasn't ashamed, I could start to actually be inside my head like, what really matters? So then what happened was there was these massive racial riots in Los Angeles. And not as if the fucking American government did anything about it, but the Canadian government was like, shit, let's get all these black and brown kids jobs. Because we don't want the Rodney King riots in Toronto and Ottawa and parts of Ontario. And so I was able to take all of my dad's rejection letters, call every single one, and one of them gave me a job. And I worked at this well-known telecommunications startup in Ottawa. Ottawa had a really burgeoning tech scene at the time. And I worked in this organization that was run by this really iconic guy, Terry Matthews. And he was a billionaire. This guy was risk on. And he was just so dynamic in the businesses he had started and how he viewed his place in the world. And I was enthralled. I was 9 degrees away from him. But the cult of personality around him in that business, the lore, when it trickles down to you, was not about, his conspicuous consumption or anything else. It was about, okay, we're launching this frame relay switch. Now we're going to buy this company. Okay, we're going to pivot the entire business to ATM. And you were just like, it was an amazing time. And so I took the bus to Newbridge. Complete luck that the controller of Newbridge would go from his nice neighborhood through this shitty neighborhood to get on the highway. And so he would see this guy standing by the bus, and eventually he saw me inside the office, and one day he stopped. He's like, you want to ride? You work at Newbridge? I'm like, yeah. And this guy, Sam Legg. So in the car, he was in the front seat, like beside Terry, and he was able to tell me like how this guy thought about this. I was like, because I would read it in the paper, and I'd be like, why is he doing this? So it just completely rewired what money was. For Terry Matthews, money was an instrument of change, right? He had a market cap. He's like, wow, that's $8 billion of change, $10 billion of change, $15 billion of change. Versus there was another guy building a company at the time. His name was Michael Copeland, who ran a company called Corel, also a billionaire. And he was the exact opposite. Had a messy divorce, married some trophy wife. He took this obscene, shiny glass from his building and covered his house in it. And so you had this dichotomy of two different characters at that time in the 90s building really interesting businesses. Corel, which was a reasonable business, Newbridge, which was a reasonable business. They were both very successful, but they manifested money so totally differently. And I was like, I want to be this guy. I want to be this mega compounder swashbuckling around trying to do really cool shit in the world. How do I do that? And Sam helped me because it was just like, you could understand from him what Terry cared about. And then for me, I just copied. I mean, a lot of my life, quite honestly, is just copying things that I see. There's not a lot of original thought here. It truly is not. I mean, we can all pretend we're all fucking geniuses. Honestly, be good copiers. It's the best thing in the world. Like, be around high-functioning, high-quality people and just copy the shit that they do. Observe the shit that's, kind of crappy, and then don't do that stuff. There's about 150 people that run the world. Anybody who wants to go into politics, they're all fucking puppets, okay? There are 150, and they're all men, that run the world, period, full stop. They control most of the important assets. They control the money flows. And these are not the tech entrepreneurs. Now, they are going to get rolled over the next 5 to 10 years by the people that are really underneath pulling the strings. And when you get behind the curtain and see how that world works, what you realize is it is unfairly set up for them and their progeny. Now, I'm not going to say that that's something that we can rip apart, but first order of business is I want to break through and be at that table. That's the first order of business. And the way that I do that is by proving that I can do what they do as well as they do it. And then do it better than how they do it. Because at the end of the day, they are commercial fucking animals. Okay? And they'll open the door out of curiosity and they'll let me stay because I add value. And then once I'm there, I can open the door for other people who can try to do the same thing. So my entire goal now is to be in a position to aggregate enough of the capital of the world to then reallocate it against my worldview. And I'm not saying my worldview is the best or right, but it is mine. And at the end of the day, there are 150 other fucking guys with their worldview, and they don't give a shit what you think about their fucking worldview. That's the truth. And so why not me? Why not? Why not one of you? Why not? Through the Warriors, I've met a lot of players, obviously. One of them who I've become unbelievably close to is David Lee. David Lee just got engaged to this unbelievable woman, Caroline Wozniacki, tennis player. Anyways, we were working out this morning. And then you see what it really means to be extremely dedicated, in their case, to something which is physical fitness because they're professional athletes. When I give up, right, when the average human gives up, their brain goes into fucking overdrive. Okay? And they're like, there's this next level burst. And so like, it's that. Yeah. It's like when things get hard, can you double down? A different example, we had yesterday, we do these things every quarter called quarterly portfolio reviews. We're incredibly intensive review of our entire portfolio, revisiting our strategy, talking about all the things we're doing to make sure we're on the right track. And I had this observation, which was, I started a diabetes business, but that business took 7 years to get to a place where we even have a chance of being viable. And I think to myself, in that example, I embodied a bit of Caroline Wozniacki. When things got hard, I pushed through the pain. Now, in my case, the pain was the fear of failure, continuing to write more money, a belief that I had that this business was going to work. And today, that business manages 1 million diabetics. I, as a capitalist, want a starting line where all of those people can run a race so that I can pick the winner. No offense to any of you here. And it took us 3 years where now those building blocks exist, and I'm like, wow. How many times did I have to look at my partners and say, no, the easy answer is to walk away, the hard answer is to double down, we have to support this business. That culture is missing here. So part of what we're trying to do to achieve those goals is like, take really big, audacious points of view on the world, and then train ourselves to be patient. And it's really, really hard. The entire society is set up to not be patient anymore. By the way, if it works, it's where all the money comes. Like if you talk about where all of the gains, where all of the value will be created over the next 50 years, it'll be in those hard things. And the reason is because those white spaces are so wide open. The competitive pressures are non-existent. For example, today you have this weirdly academic argument about climate change. It exists, it doesn't exist. Well, we were in an ice age, now it's more, of course the Earth, who cares? What's undeniable is that we're ripping apart the biodiversity of our planet. What is undeniable is that we as a human population will be forced to concentrate because certain parts of the world will get basically, subsumed by water. We do not have food supplies these are conclusively known to be true. Yet nobody's really working on a problem. And part of it is because the people won't have the ambition to try to go after it. The capital markets don't reward that kind of decision making. But if somebody were to solve it, don't you think that they are, in economic terms, a multi-trillionaire? Of course. You think food delivery is where like the next great fucking breakthrough is gonna come? You know? You're all hopped up on fucking marijuana and you need a fucking brownie. Like, what a joke. Go and look through Crunchbase and all the shitty, useless, idiotic companies that have gotten funded doing garbage like that versus climate change.
I mean, you've been outspoken about the Trump administration's position on immigration, on a number. I mean, these things are going to collide in government and business, right?
Yeah.
That's happening now.
Yeah.
So, what do you want these future business leaders to do about it once they get into that spot?
Get the money. Get the money, and then let's get around a table and let's create new rules. Literally that simple. Get the fucking money. I'm serious. Do not get it. It is going to be made. It is going to be allocated. And you have a moral imperative to make sure that if you have a point of view that matters and you want to reflect it, you get it. I'm going to go get it. Other people are going to go get it. And then it will be about a competition of views. And don't wrap yourself in all this like, you know, liberal kind of bullshit about like, oh my God, money, blah. No, stop. Here's how the fucking world works, okay? It drives the world for better or for worse. Economic incentives drive entire swaths of populations to behave in very, very predictable, and then when you take it away, unpredictable ways. Ask anybody in your class that's from a developing nation. Ask anybody in your class like who has seen that play out from where they're from. So that's what you have to do. You got to go and get it. The question is, don't be a sellout. Whatever your worldview is, you should be spending time to think about what that is, so that when you control some of these purse strings, you push that view into the world. I will never judge you, and you should not judge me for what that worldview is. But the point is, the more diversity of those views, the more rational actors we have, and the more of a balanced, fair system. That is what diversity really means to me. It doesn't mean like, let's manage back to a quota. You know, it doesn't mean like, okay, we need a black guy, a brown guy, we need a few. That's not what it means. This is what it means. Right? There are people in this audience that have probably dealt with the same kind of like life that I've dealt with. You have a very unique worldview that matters. And in the absence of capital, you're irrelevant. With capital, you're powerful. And then you decide. In small ways, in medium-sized ways, in large ways, right? It just depends on the scale of capital that you have. I think that hype eventually fades, and what you're really left with is either a really good company or a really bad company, and no amount of hype can change that reality. So the point that I'm trying to make is that sometimes the narrative of how success is described is very different from how a company was actually built. And I think that the way that you will be successful is by having the discipline to focus on the thing that you think is the most important and not get distracted by all these external signals. And all of these signals serve to do is to try to find ways of packaging you into their framework. And the problem with doing that is if you all of a sudden start to believe that framework that is not your own, then you get distracted, you make mistakes, and when you make mistakes, other people who don't make those mistakes win. You know, when I talked about not reading TechCrunch, I say jokingly, TechCrunch itself is a relatively useful blog at times. But the more general point that I'm trying to make is that you should not spend all of your time in the blogosphere to try to guide your intuition on what you should be doing. And so, you know, when I look at how I spend my time, all of those blogs, I allocate no more than 30 minutes once a week. And what I do is I very quickly peruse them to make sure that I know what's going on. But the rest of the time, I spend so much time on Wikipedia, I spend so much time in technical websites, I spend so much time trying products and using different products and coming to my own conclusions. And that informs my perspective of the world, it informs my understanding of very fundamental technologies, it allows me to stay abreast of things, and it allows me to prevent myself, again, from being distracted by the populist perception of things versus the actual reality of things. Oh, there is one book that I would recommend, which I've read end to end, and I think for me, and I'm just going to tell you, in this immigrant condition, or like the psychology of how I helped myself, it's called The Adult Children of Alcoholics. And I would really encourage anybody who finds any of the first part of what I spoke about interesting to read that book, because it is written in 3 parts. And part 1 is, what have you lived? And it goes into so much detail that it was just stunning to me how much of that I had lived. And the first time in my life when I had thought that I was suffering alone, I realized so many other people had gone through this, so much so that this woman in the 70s could write a definitive book about it. Okay, that's section 1. In section 2 is, it then says, here's probably all the traits that you brought with you into your adult life. And so many of them rang true. And then section 3 was, here's how you can start to put together a plan to help fix yourself. Adult Children of Alcoholics is the only book that I really would recommend. And it's not for adult, it's not just because you grew up in an alcoholic family. I just think it's like any kind of dysfunction, it's incredibly helpful. But otherwise, I meander, I read a lot, I ask a lot of random questions, and I try to give myself other ways of exploring my intelligence. Working on yourself is a really meaningful way of working on your intelligence. You know, being alone sometimes is a really powerful way of clarifying the things that you think are important to you. These are not all things anymore that are valued, right? We've stripped it all away. We really have, in the last 10 years, stripped it all away. And in many ways, we've amplified the worst parts of it. So I would just encourage you to sort of like work on yourself. I really think like I was an evolutionary person with the same values. I may have been a little more douchey when I was younger or harder to deal with, but I was still the same person, and I frankly felt that I had the same worth as a human being when I was growing up on welfare, or when I was in my 20s or 30s, or now in my 40s. I think that, you know, money is a projection that other people use, and I used it on myself for a while, and now I use it less. And so, you know, being in a position to actually realize that, you know, the school teacher that makes $60,000 is just as important as I am is the truth. And so, yeah, you could take it all away. I don't really care. It'd be a fun ride no matter what. I think I have a great set of memories that I've created for myself, and the journey's been a blast, and I hope to have another 50 years of those things. You know, what I was speaking about on CNBC was just my frustration about not wanting to acknowledge, where the Federal Reserve and Treasury were not acknowledging how the actual economy works. The United States is an economy where the overwhelming majority of the GDP is generated by consumers. And the way that, you know, consumers lift up the American economy is by spending money. And when you take revenues away from the American consumer because they're unemployed or because they can't earn wages, then they're going to spend less, which means that the economy contracts and you have a recession. So first principles thinking would tell you that you put money in the hands of consumers, and you put enough money in their hands such that the amount that they have exceeds what they need to live, and then the excess spending they will spend. And the reason why that's important is then it forces companies to then reopen faster, hire people more. Invariably, what you'll see is then they'll also have to pay them more because, again, these consumers have more money. But that's actually all a good rebalancing of what's been happening for the last 40 years, which is that the pendulum has swung. You know, in economic theory, you say that the pendulum swings between labor and capital. And in the last 40 years of trickle-down economics, what we've really done is swung the pendulum so far towards capital that people who are the labor class don't really have the earning power that they actually had before. And putting a lot more money into their hands, where effectively you have to pay them more to come back to work, isn't a bad thing. It will recalibrate what is a very lopsided distribution of leverage. And so getting power into the hands of labor and getting more money into the hands of labor actually sort of subverts and sort of puts an end to trickle-down economic theory. And it kind of worked in the 80s, but frankly in the 90s and 2000s and, you know, now it's a dated economic philosophy that doesn't map to how the world works.